This presentation has been made with every effort at historical accuracy, but may contain errors. On December 7th, 1941, the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor killed thousands of Americans. The nation was united in grief and resolve. Men and women across the country prepared for war. Among those who answered the call were Edward T. Sullivan and George Metropolis. They left behind their families, their jobs, and everything they knew to quite literally risk their lives for the country. Nothing could prepare them for what was to come. But first, we must go back 100 years. In 1845, disaster struck Ireland. The potato blight devastated the country. This was the Great Famine. Over 1 million people starved to death or died from related causes. More than 1 million others fled, boarding coffin ships bound for America. 1 out of 4 Irishmen were now simply gone. Michael O'Sullivan was born in 1866 in the famine's aftermath in Flemingstown, Cork. The scars of the famine didn't fade quickly. Michael's family held on to the dream that one day their descendants might have a better life. John Sullivan was Michael's son. Meanwhile, in 1867, Kostas Demetriou Metropolis was born into a Greece still recovering from centuries of Ottoman rule. Freedom had come, but at a steep price. Poverty, instability, and political turmoil defined Kostas's childhood. Yet even in these struggles, there was hope. A chance to build a new life far from the shadows of war. Back in Ireland, Margaret Doona's life began in tragedy. She was born in Killorglin, County Kerry, the daughter of Timothy and Bridget Agnes Doona. After her mother's death, Margaret and her sister were caught begging in the streets, a desperate act of survival. The 2 girls were arrested and sent to a workhouse, a grim institution where poverty was treated as a crime. Workhouses were not places of sanctuary. They were places of hard labor and humiliation. Margaret learned early that survival meant enduring both hunger and cruelty. She carried those lessons with her when she immigrated to America. Margaret married John Sullivan in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Together, they built a family. But Margaret's trials weren't yet over. She would endure 15 pregnancies, but 6 of her children never lived to see adulthood. Imagine the weight of such grief. 6 deaths, and with each one, a piece of her heart. And yet Margaret pressed forward, raising the 9 surviving children with quiet power. Among them was Edward T. Sullivan, born on January 8, 1923. Like many immigrants of his era, Kostas Metropolis sought to preserve his cultural heritage while adapting to life in a new country. He was known for his entrepreneurial spirit and strong commitment to Greek values. He worked tirelessly to support his family, often engaging in labor-intensive jobs. Jenny George bore Kostas 9 children, of which George was number 7. Kostas joined the Ahippa Society, the Peloponnesian Society, and St. George's Greek Orthodox Church. These organizations were lifelines for immigrants. They helped men like Kostas find stability in a foreign land while preserving their heritage. His legacy wasn't just his family, it was the community he nurtured, building a foundation for generations to come. Let us also consider Eastern Europe. Alice Kopiwoda, born as Alexandria Lucius in Lithuania, grew up on a farm where life was marked by hard and discouraging work. When Alice was still young, her mother passed away, leaving her as the eldest sibling and placing on her shoulders the heavy responsibility of helping her family survive. The relentless labor of farm life instilled in her a grit that would define her character. Seeking a better future, Alice was the first of her family to immigrate. Alice settled with husband Stanislaus in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Stanislaus worked long, grueling hours as a renderer, a job that required endurance and strength. It was in this environment of sacrifice that Mary was born in 1924. Raised in the shadow of her parents' struggles, Mary learned the value of hard work and unyielding determination. When tragedy struck her own family years later, Mary carried on. She became the anchor for her surviving children. The Greek beauty Catherine Karanikolas, born in 1920, was daughter of George Karanikolas, a man whose vision carved wealth from adversity. In the roaring 1920s, George co-built and sold a movie theater for what would now be a fortune of $6 million. When Catherine married George Metropolis, their love was a rebellious symphony of sweetness. As a youth, George was a rugged Golden Gloves boxer. George lacked wealth or pedigree, while Catherine was a pampered poet with a soul stretched between beauty and sorrow. They married. She lived as a tortured artist, burdened by grief. 3 times she bore life. 3 times her arms were left empty, as each newborn died within 3 days. Hope had all but slipped away, until a miracle, a child who survived. Charles became her triumph over despair, a rose grown in the desert. The First World War was supposed to be the war to end all wars. It wasn't. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, the call of duty echoed throughout the nation, and the children of immigrants unflinchingly answered the call. Edward T. Sullivan served aboard the USS Appalachian, a ship vital to the Pacific Theater. As a machinist's mate, Edward worked in the engine room, a place of relentless heat and deafening noise. Temperatures soared past 120 degrees, and men would collapse from dehydration. But Edward's work was critical. Every engine he maintained, every adjustment he made, kept the Appalachian moving. During the invasions of Guam and Leyte, the Appalachian carried troops and supplies that would change the tide of the war. George Metropolis served aboard the USS Tautog, one of the most decorated submarines of World War II. Known as the Terrible T, the Tautog sank 26 enemy ships, becoming a legend in the Pacific. One of its most famous victories came when it took down a heavily armed Japanese warship. As the torpedoes struck their target, the explosion lit up the ocean. Cheers erupted through the submarine, a rare moment of triumph in a war filled with danger. But life aboard the Tautog wasn't always victory. In 1943, the crew endured a relentless depth charge attack. Trapped beneath the waves, with explosions rattling the walls around them, every man prayed the next blast wouldn't be the end. Through it all, George remained steady. His courage helped the Tautog survive and earn its place in history. Edward and George returned home as heroes, but the war had changed them. They had faced death, endured the unthinkable, and emerged stronger, but not without scars. After the war, both men returned to rebuild their lives. Much of the world was in shambles, but the US was essentially unscathed, with a huge workforce of veterans who now had useful trade skills and understood chain of command. This led to the greatest economic boom in American history and a tidal wave of American optimism. But tragedy wasn't far away for these veterans. George Metropolis lost his beloved wife when Charles was still a teenager. George never remarried, instead throwing himself into his work. Edward and wife Mary faced heartbreak as well. They lost their second-born son, Edward Jr., when he was very young. Edward Sr. was a deeply faithful man who actively participated in his church communities, both in Cambridge and Waukegan, Illinois. In Waukegan, he regularly read the epistles during Mass, a testament to his faith in Christ and his role as a respected member of the parish. Beyond his service during worship, he also took on the responsibility of driving the local nuns before they were permitted to drive themselves, embodying a quiet, selfless dedication to his God and community. His actions reflected his strong moral character and his commitment to living a life of protective service to others. George Metropolis was a pastry chef and instructor at the Culinary Institute of America. Over 2 decades at the CIA, George perfected the iconic pecan diamond, a challenging dessert requiring masterful precision, which went on to become the signature dish of the entire institute. His craft earned him the prestigious Gold Medal of France, an honor awarded only once in a chef's lifetime, cementing his legacy as one of the greats. Known for his humor and larger-than-life personality, Metropolis often joked, "Booze and broads are my only interests." But beneath the humor was a man deeply committed to elevating and mentoring others in the field, including the growing number of women entering the pastry arts during his tenure. He was ahead of his time in recognizing and celebrating their talent, famously remarking, "In some instances, they equal and sometimes surpass the men's skills in baking and pastry." Metropolis not only taught over 12,000 students during his career, but helped pave the way for countless women in the culinary world. His nickname, Screaming George, may have reflected his intensity, but his students knew him as a generous mentor who demanded excellence while inspiring greatness. Jacob Rosenthal, then president of the CIA, summed it up best. "Mr. Metropolis makes the best Jewish rye, some of the best French bread, and the best gougères, pastry choux with Swiss cheese, anywhere in the world, better than I have had in Europe. He makes the best baklava, which as a Greek specialty might be expected. But he also makes the best fine fruit, and finally, the glory of the gourmet's table, his masterpiece, his pecan diamonds." Edward Sullivan's work as a naval diesel engine instructor at the Great Lakes Naval Base was vital to the Navy's readiness. He trained sailors in the operation and maintenance of complex diesel engines, ensuring they could power and maintain critical naval vessels. His expertise made him an extraordinary instructor, capable of simplifying complex systems to ensure sailors were prepared for duty. Both men became teachers, not just of trades, but of excellence. Their work ethic, precision, and commitment set an example for all of us. Edward's daughter, Karen, recounted how, at an engagement party, a man began using foul language, repeatedly dropping the F word in earshot of Karen and Mary. Edward, with firm authority, approached the man and told him to stop. Rather than apologizing, the man nervously scoffed, "I'm sure your daughter's heard it before." Ed responded, "Not in my presence, she hasn't." At age 53, Edward Sullivan succumbed to leukemia. His 5 remaining children would go on to great success, and the ensuing grandchildren and great-grandchildren would be many. When George Metropolis was dying in his 80s, it would be on a hospital bed in his only son Charles's living room in Pell Lake, Wisconsin. He was surrounded by his 9 beautiful grandchildren, who slept peacefully in that humble house. George left his grandchildren a large inheritance, enabling the family to relocate to the lush shores of South Carolina. Even in death, George went beyond the call of duty. At the time of this writing, George Metropolis and Edward Sullivan are grandfathers of more than 20 grandchildren and at least 10 great-grandchildren. Our ancestors endured famine, war, and loss, but they thrived. Today, we face a world of new challenges, technology, and change reshape our lives at an unprecedented pace. But remember this: the blood in your veins is the blood of survivors. It is the blood of men and women who refused to be defeated. They should have been broken. They should have lost their minds. They didn't. And we are still talking about them 100 years later. Their legacy wasn't about achieving wealth or fame. It was about service. Legacy is not a trophy, but a byproduct of a life well lived. Legacy is the inescapable echo of a human life, good, bad, or ugly, resounding in the memory of those who truly knew us.